Hello, my name is Miriam Levitin, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and this is Let's Talk Communication. This session is part of the Masters and Johnson Sexuality Symposium, sponsored by the Sexual Health and Education Specialization at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. The symposium is not intended for audiences under the age of 18 due to discussion of sex and sexuality. And as a heads up, there will be mention of sexual assault in this presentation, so please take care of yourself. I want to start off by sharing a story about Slack, which is a business communication platform. Slack has a chatbot known as Slackbot that can help you achieve different tasks. When you upload a link to an external app, the Slackbot will recognize it and ask you if you want to connect the app to Slack. Recently, I uploaded a Google Drive link and I got this message. So Slackbot explained exactly what would happen if I chose to connect Google Drive, and I was given the options connect, not now, or don't ask again. Now, I wasn't ready to make a decision at the time, so I clicked not now, and this was the message I received. You're probably wondering, what does this have to do with sexual health? Well, it dawned on me that this AI bot is better at communicating than we are. Imagine if it were this simple to convey, you don't want to try anal right now, but you're open to being asked again at another time, or that you don't want to have sex with this person and you don't want them to ask you again. The most important sex organ is the brain. I know it sounds cliche, but we really need our brains to communicate with sexual partners, ask for what we want and what our partners want, and set and accept boundaries. How can this whole complex process be distilled into one concept, consent, with binary response options? We do need to be able to draw a line between coercive and non-coercive sex. And while consent has emerged as a growing strategy for preventing sexual assault, there's no universal definition. And the legal definition of rape is based upon the absence of consent. However, new research is expanding how we think about permission and desire in sexual encounters. So consent is an agreement to do something, and wantedness is a desire for something. And while wantedness may influence consent, they are distinct. People engage in sexual activity for many different reasons, some of which are wanted, while others are not. Our current legal and mainstream societal understanding of sex is binary. It's either good or it's rape. And if we can understand that consensual and wanted sex is good, and non-consensual and unwanted sex is rape, what about the other two options? Well, sex that was wanted but not consented to is also rape, and sex that was unwanted but consensual is not legally rape, but it's not good. If we can all accept consent as the bare minimum for a sexual encounter, then we can think about how to have sex that is also wanted and pleasurable. Okay, so now going forward with this assumption that consent is distinct from wantedness, why would someone, let's call them Z, deny consent to sex that they wanted? Well, maybe Z, or the person that Z desires, is in a monogamous relationship with someone else. Or maybe Z wants to wait until they're married to their partner to have sex with them. Maybe Z wants to have sex, but doesn't have the resources they need to feel safe. Then there's token resistance, which means saying no while meaning yes. Examples would be Z not wanting their partner to think they're promiscuous, or worrying that their desire for sex is immoral, or maybe they want to exert control over their partner. We should really be critical of the social factors that make it difficult for certain people to communicate honestly. What about reasons why someone might consent to sex that they don't actually want? Well, maybe Z feels like it's expected of them, or that their partner will end their relationship if Z doesn't have sex with them. Or maybe Z is not afraid of losing the relationship, but they just want to please their partner. Maybe Z is afraid of what might happen if they don't have sex with this person. Or Z might not have had sexual experiences before and doesn't know how to express their desires or lack thereof. Or maybe Z is intoxicated and can't think clearly. Consenting to unwanted sex can have distressing outcomes similar to those experienced by survivors of sexual trauma, even if the sex didn't meet the legal definition of rape. And pleasure is another dimension of a sexual experience that's often conflated with consent and wantedness when it's actually distinct. Pleasure is defined by how enjoyable sex is, which can be based on physical arousal and/or psychological appraisal. And this is important because of something called arousal non-concordance. Our physical arousal doesn't always align with our mental or emotional arousal. So someone can feel anxious or scared or uncomfortable and still exhibit physical signs of arousal and even reach orgasm. Someone can also be enjoying the sex mentally and emotionally without physical indications of arousal. And I also want to note that pleasure isn't the only reason that people want sex. And additionally, someone could consent to and/or want sex that in reality doesn't end up being pleasurable or a good experience. So just because sex is consensual and someone wasn't assaulted doesn't mean that they had a good time or that the experience didn't bring up unpleasurable feelings like anxiety or discomfort. So how do we avoid this? Well, we become better communicators. The portrayals of silent sex that we often see in the media aren't realistic. Where's the dialogue? There's so much variability in sexual preferences. How can we know what someone wants if we don't ask them? We also need to check in with our partners to make sure that they feel comfortable and safe. Don't you want your partners to have an enjoyable experience? Sex is made so much better when we communicate. And we need to learn how to communicate beyond just no means no. Here are just a few examples of ways we can be honest and open about our rebuffs. And equally important is learning how to respond respectfully and kindly to a rebuff. I felt so affirmed when Slackbot told me, okay, I won't do that, but I will remember to ask you again next time. Yes, I had said, not right now. That's what I meant, and I got exactly what I wanted. The difficulty in defining, discussing, and unifying the common negotiation of sexual activity is a barrier to reducing sexual violence, as well as a barrier to promoting and pursuing enjoyable sex. The legal notion of consent assumes that we all have a right to self-determination and free choice, failing to recognize how we're impacted by systems of power, privilege, and oppression. We are deeply influenced by the cultural messages we receive about appropriate sexual behavior, shaping and constraining our individual sexuality, desires, and preferences, and impacting our sexual encounters. Like all binaries, the model of yes versus no is not sufficient. Yes means yes fails to account for unequal power, pressure, and coercion, while no means no assumes that non-responsiveness can't ever be consent and that someone who's silenced by fear must have consented. I want to see less discussion on the legality of sex and more research on how we negotiate and communicate. It takes practice to discover our sexual desires, learn how to communicate clearly, and how to accept direct communication. But this is essential to having the sex that we want, consent to, and enjoy. Thank you for watching. Please check out my resource sheet for more information, including some amazing tools that can help you explore your desires and boundaries and communicate more openly and honestly with partners.